The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her slight frame dwarfed by the towering recruits around her. The weight of her combat pack seemed to pull at her shoulders with each step, but she kept her chin up and her eyes forward. Today marked the beginning of advanced infantry training, and she was determined to prove she belonged here. Sergeant Daniel "Tank" Morrison watched from the observation deck, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl. At 38, he had spent nearly 2 decades in the military, climbing through the ranks with a reputation for being both fair and unforgiving. His nickname came not just from his imposing 6'3" frame, but from his ability to push through any obstacle with relentless determination. When he spotted Martinez in the lineup below, his jaw tightened. "Another one," he muttered to Lieutenant Collins, who stood beside him reviewing the day's training roster. "Command keeps sending me these lightweight recruits thinking they can handle real combat situations." Lieutenant Collins glanced up from his clipboard. "Martinez has excellent scores from basic training, Sergeant. Top marksman in her class." "Shooting targets on a range is different from carrying wounded soldiers under fire," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. "When bullets start flying and your unit depends on you to haul 200 pounds of gear and injured personnel across hostile terrain, those pretty scores don't mean much." Down on the training ground, Sarah could feel eyes on her as she took her position in formation. She had heard the whispers from fellow recruits about Sergeant Morrison's reputation. Some called him the best trainer in the division, others called him impossible to please. What everyone agreed on was that he had little patience for soldiers he deemed unable to handle the physical demands of combat operations. The training began with a standard obstacle course, but Morrison had modified it specifically for this advanced group. The course included carrying simulated wounded soldiers, navigating through mock urban environments under simulated gunfire, and completing complex tactical maneuvers while maintaining full combat loads. As the recruits lined up for their individual runs, Sarah noticed Morrison's attention seemed particularly focused on her performance. The first recruit, a muscular young man named Peterson, completed the course in respectable time. Morrison nodded approvingly and made notes on his evaluation sheet. The second recruit, Williams, struggled with the wounded soldier carry but managed to finish within acceptable parameters. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the starting line with steady breathing and focused determination. "Martinez," Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the training area. "You sure you're ready for this? This isn't basic training anymore. We don't have time for soldiers who can't pull their weight in real situations." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Ready, Sergeant." Morrison's expression remained skeptical as he started the timer. Sarah launched into the course with surprising speed, her smaller frame allowing her to navigate the low crawls and tight spaces more efficiently than her larger counterparts. However, when she reached the wounded soldier simulation, the challenge became apparent. The dummy weighed 180 pounds, designed to represent a fully equipped fallen comrade. She struggled initially, her smaller muscles straining against the weight. Around her, she could hear some recruits muttering doubts, echoing what she was sure Morrison was thinking. But Sarah had prepared for this moment. During her personal training time, she had studied leverage techniques and body mechanics, learning how to use her entire body efficiently rather than relying purely on upper body strength. Adjusting her grip and body position, she managed to lift and carry the dummy, though her pace slowed considerably. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she navigated the remaining obstacles, but she maintained her focus and completed the course. Her time was slower than the previous recruits, but she had finished without assistance. Morrison approached as she caught her breath, his expression unreadable. Time was substandard, Martinez. In a real combat situation, that delay could mean the difference between saving a life and losing one. Understood, Sergeant. I'll improve, Sarah replied, still breathing heavily but maintaining her composure. Improvement isn't guaranteed, Morrison continued, his voice loud enough for other recruits to hear. Some soldiers just don't have what it takes for frontline service. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations and requesting transfer to support roles. The word stung, but Sarah refused to show it. She had faced doubt and skepticism throughout her military career, from the moment she first announced her intention to join infantry rather than pursuing traditional female military occupational specialties. Each challenge had only strengthened her resolve to prove that capability wasn't determined solely by physical size. Over the following weeks, the training intensified. Morrison designed increasingly challenging scenarios, each one seeming to highlight the physical disadvantages Sarah faced compared to her larger counterparts. There were long-distance marches with full combat loads, tactical exercises requiring soldiers to carry heavy equipment over rough terrain, and combat simulations where physical strength played a crucial role in mission success. During a particularly demanding night exercise, Sarah's unit was tasked with establishing a defensive perimeter while under simulated enemy fire. Each soldier was responsible for carrying specific equipment to their assigned positions, including heavy machine gun components, ammunition, and communication gear. Sarah drew the assignment for one of the heavier loads, a decision that several recruits quietly questioned. As they moved through the darkened training area, using night vision equipment to navigate rough terrain, Sarah felt the weight of her assigned gear testing her endurance. The pack pulled at her shoulders, and the additional equipment threw off her center of gravity on the uneven ground. Behind her, she could hear Recruit Johnson making quiet comments about the wisdom of giving critical equipment to someone who might not be able to deliver it when needed. Halfway through the exercise, disaster struck. While navigating a steep incline, Sarah's foot slipped on loose gravel. The uneven weight distribution of her pack caused her to lose balance, and she tumbled down the slope, her equipment scattering in the darkness. The sound of the fall and her equipment hitting rocks echoed through the quiet night, potentially compromising the entire unit's position in a real combat scenario. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio immediately. "What's your status, Martinez?" Sarah assessed herself quickly. Her left ankle throbbed, and she could feel scrapes along her arms where she had hit the rocky ground, but nothing seemed seriously injured. More concerning was her scattered equipment, some of which was critical for the mission's success. "Equipment scattered, Sergeant. Recovering now." "Negative," Morrison's voice was sharp. "Exercise terminated. All units return to base." The walk back to the training facility felt longer than the entire previous exercise. Sarah limped slightly, trying to minimize the obvious pain in her ankle, while carrying the recovered equipment. Around her, the other recruits maintained silence, but she could feel their frustration at the ended exercise and their doubt about her capabilities. In the debriefing room, Morrison's assessment was direct and unforgiving. In a real combat situation, Martinez's failure to maintain equipment security could have resulted in mission failure and casualties. A machine gunner position without proper equipment support leaves the entire unit vulnerable. Sarah sat quietly, knowing that any attempt to explain or defend herself would only reinforce the perception that she was making excuses rather than accepting responsibility. The ankle injury, which X-rays later revealed to be a minor sprain, seemed to validate Morrison's concerns about her physical readiness for combat operations. After the other recruits were dismissed, Morrison approached Sarah privately. His expression had softened slightly, but his message remained clear. "Martinez, you're a dedicated soldier with good instincts and excellent technical skills. But dedication isn't enough in infantry operations. Your performance consistently shows that you're operating at your physical limits, and that leaves no margin for error when lives are on the line." Sarah looked up at him, her jaw set with determination despite the doubt creeping into her own mind. "What are you recommending, Sergeant?" "I'm recommending you consider transfer to intelligence or communications," Morrison replied. "Those roles utilize your strengths while acknowledging your physical limitations. There's important work to be done there, and you'd excel in those positions." The suggestion felt like a defeat, even though Morrison had presented it respectfully. Sarah had joined infantry specifically because she wanted to prove that women could serve effectively in combat roles, that physical strength was only one component of military effectiveness. A transfer would feel like admitting that the skeptics had been right all along. "I'd like to continue with training, Sergeant," she said finally. "I believe I can improve and contribute effectively to an infantry unit." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "Your choice, Martinez. But understand that my job is to prepare soldiers for combat, not to validate anyone's personal goals. If you can't demonstrate improved performance, I won't hesitate to recommend your removal from the program." That evening, alone in her quarters, Sarah sat on her narrow bunk and honestly assessed her situation. The physical challenges were undeniable. She was operating at her limits while her male counterparts seemed to have reserves of strength available when situations demanded extra effort. Her technical skills and tactical understanding were solid, but Morrison was right that those advantages meant little if she couldn't physically execute her responsibilities under stress. She thought about her reasons for choosing infantry service. Part of it was certainly about proving capabilities and breaking barriers, but the deeper motivation was her genuine belief that she could contribute meaningfully to protecting and serving alongside other soldiers. The question now was whether that contribution required her to match the physical capabilities of larger soldiers, or whether there were other ways to add value to military operations. The next morning brought news that would change the trajectory of both Sarah's and Morrison's military careers. Their training unit had been selected for accelerated deployment to support ongoing operations in a conflict zone where experienced infantry soldiers were urgently needed. The remaining weeks of training would be compressed and intensified to prepare the unit for real-world combat operations. Morrison gathered the recruits for the announcement, his expression more serious than usual. "This isn't training anymore," he told them. "In 6 weeks, you'll be deployed to active combat zones where the skills you've learned here will determine whether you and your fellow soldiers come home safely. Anyone who has doubts about their readiness should speak with me privately." Sarah felt the weight of the announcement settle over her like a physical presence. 6 weeks to prove herself capable of frontline service, or face the reality that her infantry career might end before it truly began. Around her, she could see similar concern in the faces of other recruits, though she suspected their worries were different from her own. As the briefing concluded and recruits began filing out, Morrison's eyes met Sarah's across the room. The unspoken message was clear: this would be her final opportunity to demonstrate that she belonged in infantry service. The upcoming weeks would test not just her physical capabilities, but her mental resilience and tactical effectiveness under the pressure of impending deployment. That afternoon, Sarah found herself alone on the training facility's fitness area, working through exercises designed to build the specific strength and endurance she would need for combat operations. Her ankles still ached from the previous night's fall, but she pushed through the discomfort, knowing that real combat would demand much more than training through minor injuries. As she worked, she noticed Morrison observing from a distance, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. For the first time since training began, she wondered if his harsh assessments were motivated not by prejudice, but by genuine concern for her safety and the safety of soldiers who might depend on her in combat situations. The realization didn't make his criticism easier to accept, but it helped her understand the stakes involved in proving herself capable of meeting infantry standards. The sun was setting as Sarah finished her workout, painting the training facility in golden light that reminded her of home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she was determined to meet them with everything she had learned and every ounce of strength she could develop. The next 6 weeks would determine whether she had truly found her place in military service, or whether she would need to find new ways to serve her country and fellow soldiers. The intensity of training increased dramatically following the deployment announcement. Morrison restructured the remaining program to simulate combat conditions as closely as possible, incorporating sleep deprivation, stress inoculation, and complex tactical scenarios that required split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. For Sarah, each day became a test of her determination to prove herself worthy of serving alongside her fellow soldiers in active combat. The first major challenge came during a 72-hour field exercise designed to replicate the conditions they would face in the deployment zone. The scenario involved establishing and defending a forward operating base while conducting patrol operations in hostile territory. Unlike previous training exercises, this simulation would run continuously, with soldiers rotating through different roles and responsibilities while maintaining constant operational readiness. Sarah's assignment placed her in a reconnaissance team responsible for gathering intelligence on simulated enemy positions. The role required carrying specialized communication equipment, navigation tools, and extended supplies for operations away from the main base. The total weight of her gear exceeded 90 pounds, a significant load for her frame but one she was determined to manage effectively. Morrison observed the pre-mission briefing with particular attention to how each soldier prepared for their assignments. He noted Sarah's methodical approach to organizing her equipment, using techniques she had developed to distribute weight more efficiently across her body. Her preparation time was longer than some of her counterparts, but her thoroughness suggested she understood the critical importance of proper equipment management in field conditions. The reconnaissance team leader, Corporal Hayes, was an experienced soldier who had volunteered to work with the Advanced Training Unit to share real-world combat experience. He had served 3 deployments and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had successfully navigated dangerous situations. His initial assessment of Sarah was cautiously optimistic, focused more on her demonstrated competence and attention to detail than on concerns about her physical capabilities. As the team moved out on their first patrol, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm that maximized her efficiency while conserving energy for the long operation ahead. The reconnaissance role played to her strengths in observation and analysis, requiring careful attention to environmental details and the ability to identify potential threats or intelligence opportunities. Her smaller profile also proved advantageous for maintaining concealment during observation periods. However, the physical demands of extended patrol operations soon presented familiar challenges. The team's route included difficult terrain with steep inclines, dense vegetation, and areas requiring careful movement to avoid detection. Sarah's pace gradually slowed as fatigue accumulated, and she found herself working harder than her teammates to maintain the required operational tempo. During the second day of the exercise, while the team was conducting surveillance of a simulated enemy position, an unexpected complication arose. Hayes received radio communication that their extraction point had been compromised, requiring the team to move to an alternate location several kilometers away through particularly challenging terrain. The new route would add hours to their mission and require crossing a river that had risen due to recent rainfall. Sarah assessed the situation with growing concern. Her energy reserves were already strained from the extended operation, and the additional distance would push her physical capabilities to their limits. More critically, the river crossing would require each team member to assist others while managing their own equipment in potentially dangerous conditions. As they approached the river, Hayes called a brief halt to assess the situation. The water was running higher and faster than anticipated, creating hazardous conditions that would require careful planning and mutual support to navigate safely. He looked at each team member, evaluating their condition and capabilities for the challenging crossing ahead. "Martinez," he said quietly, "what's your honest assessment of your condition for this crossing?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Military training had taught her the importance of honest self-assessment in dangerous situations, but she also understood that acknowledging limitations could impact her standing in the unit and her future deployment prospects. The fatigue in her legs was undeniable, and her reaction time had slowed due to the accumulated stress of the extended operation. "Fatigued but functional, Corporal," she replied. "I can make the crossing with proper support and timing." Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll use buddy system crossing. Stay close to your assigned partner and communicate any problems immediately." The crossing began systematically, with team members paired to provide mutual assistance and security. Sarah was paired with Rodriguez, a solid soldier whose steady temperament and physical strength made him an ideal partner for the challenging maneuver. The rushing water was cold and reached their chests at the deepest point, creating significant resistance against their movement. Halfway across, Sarah felt her footing slip on the slippery river bottom. The current caught her pack, pulling her off balance and threatening to sweep her downstream. Rodriguez immediately moved to stabilize her, but the sudden shift in weight distribution caused both soldiers to struggle against the current. For several tense seconds, it appeared that both might be carried away by the rushing water. Drawing on reserves she didn't know she possessed, Sarah managed to regain her footing and work with Rodriguez to complete the crossing. They reached the far bank exhausted but intact, their equipment secured and their mission capability maintained. However, the incident had been observed by other team members and would certainly be included in the post-exercise evaluation. Morrison was waiting when the reconnaissance team returned to base at the end of the 72-hour exercise. His debriefing focused on tactical lessons learned and individual performance assessments. When he reached Sarah's evaluation, his tone was professional but pointed.
Martinez demonstrated solid technical competence and good decision-making under stress, he began.
However, the river crossing incident highlighted ongoing concerns about physical limitations affecting mission safety and team effectiveness. Sarah accepted the feedback without argument, knowing that defending her performance would only reinforce perceptions about her inability to handle criticism constructively. The river incident had shaken her confidence, not because of the temporary loss of footing, but because of how her fatigue had contributed to a situation that put another soldier at risk. The following week introduced urban warfare training, a component that would be critical for their deployment environment. The scenarios involved clearing buildings, conducting room-to-room searches, and engaging simulated enemies in close-quarters combat situations. Urban warfare presented different physical challenges from field operations, with less emphasis on long-distance movement and more focus on explosive bursts of activity and precise tactical execution. Sarah found herself more competitive in these scenarios. Her smaller size allowed her to move through confined spaces more easily, and her marksmanship skills proved valuable in the precise shooting required for urban engagements. During building clearing exercises, she demonstrated excellent situational awareness and effective communication with her team members. Morrison observed these training sessions with growing interest. While his concerns about Sarah's capabilities in extended field operations remained valid, her performance in urban scenarios suggested that different types of combat situations might better suit her particular combination of skills and physical attributes. The question was whether their deployment would offer opportunities to utilize those strengths effectively. The urban training culminated in a complex scenario involving a hostage rescue operation in a multi-story building. Teams were required to coordinate their movements, neutralize simulated threats, and extract civilian hostages while minimizing casualties and collateral damage. The exercise tested not only individual capabilities but also unit cohesion and tactical coordination under extreme pressure. Sarah's team was assigned to secure the upper floors of the target building while other units handled ground level and basement areas. The assignment required rapid movement up multiple flights of stairs while maintaining combat readiness and coordination with other teams. Her role involved providing covering fire and communication support during the actual rescue operation. As the exercise began, Sarah's team moved efficiently through the building, clearing rooms and advancing toward their objectives. Her communication skills proved valuable in coordinating between teams, and her marksmanship was precise during simulated engagements. However, the repeated climbs up flights of stairs while carrying full combat gear began to take their toll on her endurance. By the time they reached the target floor, Sarah was breathing heavily and fighting fatigue in her legs. The final phase of the operation required rapid movement and precise execution, with no margin for error due to the simulated presence of hostages. As they approached the critical room, Sarah had to draw on her remaining energy reserves to maintain tactical effectiveness. The actual rescue operation unfolded successfully, with all team members executing their roles effectively and achieving the mission objectives without simulated casualties. Sarah's performance during the final phase had been solid, though she was clearly operating at her physical limits by the exercise's conclusion. During the post-exercise debrief, Morrison's assessment acknowledged both Sarah's strengths and limitations. Martinez demonstrated excellent technical skills and valuable tactical thinking during urban operations, he noted. Her communication abilities and marksmanship were significant assets to team performance. He paused before continuing. However, the physical demands of multi-story operations clearly stressed her capabilities. In a real hostage situation, that level of fatigue could compromise reaction time and decision-making when precision is most critical. The feedback was fair but discouraging. Sarah was excelling in areas that played to her strengths, but the persistent physical limitations continued to raise questions about her overall combat effectiveness. With deployment approaching, the pressure to demonstrate comprehensive readiness was intensifying. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor in her quarters. Corporal Hayes knocked on her door, requesting a private conversation about her training progress and deployment readiness. His expression was serious but not unkind, suggesting he had concerns to discuss rather than criticism to deliver. "Martinez, I wanted to talk with you about the upcoming deployment and your role in the unit," Hayes began.
"I've been watching your development throughout training, and I think there are some things you should consider."
Sarah invited him to sit, preparing herself for another conversation about her physical limitations and the wisdom of seeking alternative military roles.
However, Hayes's approach was different from Morrison's direct assessments.
"You have skills that are genuinely valuable in combat situations," Hayes said. "Your observation abilities, tactical thinking, and communication skills are at a level that many soldiers never achieve.
The question isn't whether you can contribute effectively to military operations."
He paused, choosing his words carefully.
"The question is whether the infantry role is the best way to utilize those abilities.
In my experience, some of the most effective soldiers I've served with weren't necessarily the strongest or fastest, but they were the ones who could think clearly under pressure and help their units make good decisions."
Sarah considered his words carefully. "What are you suggesting, Corporal?"
"I'm suggesting that effectiveness in military service isn't just about meeting minimum physical standards," Hayes replied. "It's about finding the role where your particular combination of abilities can have the greatest impact.
Sometimes that means recognizing that your talents might be better utilized in different ways."
The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Hayes sharing experiences from his deployments and describing how different types of soldiers had contributed to mission success in various situations. His perspective was nuanced, acknowledging both the physical realities of infantry service and the broader range of skills needed for effective military operations. As Hayes prepared to leave, he offered a final observation.
"Morrison is tough on you because he's seen soldiers get hurt when they're pushed beyond their capabilities.
But he's also seen soldiers fail to reach their potential because they were afraid to push their boundaries.
Your challenge is figuring out where your boundaries actually are."
Left alone with her thoughts, Sarah reflected on the various perspectives she had received throughout training. Morrison's focus on physical readiness, Hayes's emphasis on finding the right role for her abilities, and her own determination to prove herself in infantry service represented different approaches to the same fundamental question: how could she best serve her country and fellow soldiers? The next morning brought the final phase of pre-deployment training, a comprehensive exercise that would simulate the conditions they would face in their assigned combat zone. The exercise would run for 1 week and include all aspects of military operations they had trained for, from field operations to urban warfare to emergency response situations. Morrison gathered the unit for the final briefing, his expression reflecting the seriousness of the impending deployment. "This exercise will be your last opportunity to demonstrate readiness for combat operations," he told them. "Your performance will determine not only your individual deployment status but also the overall readiness of this unit." Sarah felt the weight of his words settling over her like armor. 1 week to prove that she belonged in infantry service, that her determination and developing skills outweighed the physical limitations that had been a constant concern throughout training. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure was no longer just a matter of personal disappointment but a question of unit readiness and mission effectiveness. As the exercise began, Sarah drew on everything she had learned throughout training, from technical skills to tactical knowledge to personal insights about her own capabilities and limitations. The coming week would provide the definitive answer to questions that had followed her throughout her military career, determining whether her place was alongside fellow infantry soldiers in combat operations or in alternative roles where her abilities might be utilized differently. The final exercise began at dawn with a simulated helicopter insertion into hostile territory. Sarah's unit was tasked with establishing a temporary forward operating base, conducting reconnaissance missions, and responding to various crisis scenarios over the course of 7 days. Unlike previous training, this exercise included realistic combat stress, sleep deprivation, and genuine uncertainty about what challenges would emerge from hour to hour. Morrison had designed the exercise based on actual combat situations from recent deployments, incorporating lessons learned from real-world operations where soldiers faced life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. Every aspect of the training was intended to reveal how soldiers would perform when their training met the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat. The helicopter simulation involved rappelling from a training tower while carrying full combat loads, then immediately transitioning to tactical movement toward their objective area. Sarah executed the rappelling cleanly, her technique solid and her equipment properly secured. However, the initial movement toward the base location required covering rough terrain quickly while maintaining unit cohesion and tactical awareness. Within the first few hours, Sarah found herself settling into a sustainable rhythm that allowed her to contribute effectively to the unit's progress without becoming a limiting factor. Her preparation and conditioning had improved significantly since the beginning of training, and her understanding of how to manage her energy and capabilities had become more sophisticated. The base establishment phase played to several of Sarah's strengths. Her attention to detail proved valuable in organizing defensive positions and communication systems, while her ability to think systematically helped ensure that critical tasks were completed efficiently. Morrison observed her performance during this phase with interest, noting that her contributions were meaningful and appreciated by other soldiers in the unit. However, the second day brought a scenario that would test every aspect of their training. The unit received a simulated distress call from a reconnaissance patrol that had encountered heavy resistance and sustained casualties. Sarah's squad was assigned to conduct an immediate combat rescue operation, requiring them to move quickly across difficult terrain while prepared for enemy contact. The mission briefing was stark in its urgency. The simulated patrol had 2 wounded soldiers who required immediate medical evacuation, and enemy forces were attempting to overrun their position. Time was critical, and the rescue force would need to move fast enough to arrive before the situation became hopeless, while carrying the additional medical supplies and equipment needed to treat and evacuate casualties. Sarah's role in the rescue operation involved carrying advanced medical supplies and serving as backup communications specialist. The additional equipment increased her already substantial load, but she understood that every item was potentially critical for saving lives. As the squad prepared to move out, she focused on the techniques she had developed for managing heavy loads efficiently over extended distances. The movement to the rescue site required covering nearly 4 kilometers of rough terrain in less than 90 minutes. The pace was aggressive, designed to test whether soldiers could maintain tactical effectiveness while operating under extreme physical stress. For Sarah, the challenge was immediate and unforgiving. Her smaller stride length required more steps to cover the same ground, and the additional medical equipment strained her endurance from the beginning of the movement. Despite her determination, Sarah began to fall behind the main group within the first kilometer. Her breathing became labored, and she could feel her leg muscles starting to fatigue under the combined stress of speed and load. Squad leader Sergeant Kelly noticed her struggling pace and faced a difficult tactical decision: slow the entire squad to accommodate Sarah's capabilities, or leave her behind to maintain the mission timeline. "Martinez, what's your status?" Kelly called back during a brief halt. Sarah assessed herself honestly. Her legs felt heavy, her breathing was strained, and she knew she was operating near her limits with more than half the distance remaining. However, she also carried critical medical supplies that would be needed at the rescue site. "Fatigued but maintaining, Sergeant," she replied. Kelly studied her for a moment, clearly weighing the tactical implications of the situation. In a real combat scenario, the decision could mean the difference between successful rescue and tragic loss of life. "Williams, take half of Martinez's medical load. Rodriguez, take the other half. We maintain pace." The redistribution of equipment allowed Sarah to continue with the squad, but it also highlighted the practical limitations that had concerned Morrison throughout training. In redistributing her load, other soldiers now carried additional weight that could impact their own effectiveness during the rescue operation. The solution worked tactically, but it raised questions about overall unit efficiency and capability. When they reached the simulated rescue site, the scenario intensified dramatically. The training supervisors had created a complex situation involving multiple wounded soldiers, ongoing enemy fire, and a short window for successful evacuation. Sarah's squad needed to suppress simulated enemy positions, provide medical treatment to casualties, and coordinate helicopter extraction while under continuous pressure. Sarah immediately moved to assist with medical treatment, drawing on her training to assess and stabilize the simulated casualties. Her calm demeanor and systematic approach proved valuable in the high-stress environment, and she worked effectively with the designated medic to prepare wounded soldiers for evacuation. Her earlier struggle with the movement to the site was forgotten as she focused on executing her assigned responsibilities. However, as the evacuation helicopter approached, the exercise presented an unexpected complication. Enemy simulation fire damaged the landing zone, forcing the aircraft to use an alternate pickup site several hundred meters away through dangerous terrain. The casualties would need to be carried to the new location while the squad maintained defensive positions against continued enemy pressure. The casualty carry presented exactly the type of physical challenge that had concerned Morrison throughout Sarah's training. Each wounded soldier weighed approximately 180 pounds, and the terrain to the alternate landing zone included steep slopes and loose gravel that made footing treacherous. The squad would need to move quickly while maintaining the stability necessary to avoid further injury to the casualties. Sarah volunteered to assist with carrying one of the casualties, knowing that every available soldier was needed for the operation. However, Sergeant Kelly hesitated, clearly recalling her earlier difficulty with the movement to the rescue site. "Martinez, you're better utilized providing security and coordination," he decided. "Let the larger soldiers handle the casualty carries." The decision was tactically sound, but it reinforced the perception that Sarah's physical limitations prevented her from handling critical aspects of infantry operations. As she provided covering fire while other soldiers carried the casualties to safety, she felt the weight of being assigned to supporting rather than primary roles during the most demanding phases of operations. The rescue mission concluded successfully, with all casualties evacuated and no additional losses to the rescue squad. During the post-mission debrief, Morrison acknowledged the overall success while noting specific lessons learned and areas for improvement. When he addressed Sarah's performance, his assessment was characteristically direct. Martinez demonstrated solid technical skills and good decision-making during the medical phase of the operation, Morrison observed. However, her physical limitations during movement and casualty evacuation required tactical adjustments that impacted overall squad efficiency. The feedback was becoming a familiar pattern. Sarah's technical competence and tactical thinking were consistently recognized, but the physical demands of infantry operations continued to present challenges that affected not just her own performance but the effectiveness of her entire unit. The exercise continued for 5 more days, presenting scenarios that ranged from urban warfare to defensive operations to long-range patrol missions. Sarah's performance varied depending on the specific requirements of each situation, with her strengths becoming apparent in scenarios that emphasized marksmanship, communication, and tactical analysis, while her limitations remained evident in situations requiring sustained physical exertion or heavy lifting. On the 4th day, during a defensive operations scenario, Sarah demonstrated why her technical skills and tactical awareness had value that transcended physical limitations. The unit was tasked with holding a strategic position against a simulated enemy attack, with each soldier assigned to specific defensive sectors and responsibilities. Sarah's position included operating advanced surveillance equipment and coordinating with other defensive positions to maintain situational awareness across the entire perimeter. Her role required intense concentration and precise communication, skills that proved critical when the simulated attack began. As enemy forces approached the defensive perimeter, Sarah identified infiltration attempts that other soldiers had missed, providing early warning that allowed the unit to adjust their defensive positions effectively. Her calm communication and accurate reporting helped coordinate the defensive response, contributing significantly to the successful repulsion of the attack. Morrison observed Sarah's performance during this scenario with particular attention. Her contributions had been meaningful and valuable, demonstrating that in the right circumstances, her particular combination of skills could have significant impact on mission success. The challenge remained whether real-world deployment would provide sufficient opportunities for her to contribute in ways that utilized her strengths rather than highlighting her limitations. The final day of the exercise brought the most challenging scenario yet, a complex urban warfare situation involving hostage rescue, building clearing, and coordination with multiple agencies. The scenario was designed to test not only individual capabilities but also unit cohesion and adaptability under rapidly changing conditions. Sarah's assignment placed her in a support role that involved maintaining communication between teams operating in different parts of the urban environment. Her position was located in a building that provided good observation and communication capabilities, but it also required her to be prepared to provide backup support if any of the tactical teams encountered unexpected difficulties. As the operation unfolded, Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies while maintaining visual observation of team movements throughout the area. Her situational awareness and communication skills proved invaluable as teams navigated complex tactical challenges and required real-time coordination to maintain effectiveness. Midway through the operation, Team 3 encountered unexpected resistance while clearing a building and requested immediate backup support. Team 2 was positioned to provide assistance, but they were engaged in their own clearing operation and couldn't immediately respond. Sarah recognized the tactical problem and recommended a solution that utilized available resources more effectively. "Control, this is Martinez," she radioed to the exercise coordinators. "Team 1 has completed their sector and can provide backup to Team 3 faster than Team 2. Recommend redirecting Team 1 to assist while Team 2 maintains their current operation." The recommendation was tactically sound and demonstrated Sarah's ability to think strategically about complex situations involving multiple moving parts. Morrison, who was monitoring the exercise from the command post, noted her contribution and its impact on the successful resolution of the tactical problem. The exercise concluded with a comprehensive debrief that lasted several hours. Morrison evaluated each soldier's performance across all scenarios, providing detailed feedback about strengths, weaknesses, and deployment readiness. When he reached Sarah's evaluation, his assessment was more nuanced than previous feedback sessions. "Martinez has demonstrated consistent technical competence and valuable tactical thinking throughout this exercise," Morrison began. "Her communication skills, marksmanship, and ability to analyze complex situations are significant assets that contributed meaningfully to unit effectiveness." He paused, considering his words carefully. However, the physical limitations that have been evident throughout training continue to present challenges for certain types of infantry operations. The question moving forward is how to best utilize her capabilities within the constraints of operational requirements. Sarah listened to the assessment with mixed feelings. The recognition of her strengths was encouraging, but the persistent concerns about her physical limitations suggested that her future in infantry service remained uncertain. The upcoming deployment would provide the ultimate test of whether her contributions could outweigh the tactical adjustments required to accommodate her limitations. That evening, as Sarah cleaned and organized her equipment after the week-long exercise, she reflected on the patterns that had emerged throughout training. She had consistently demonstrated technical competence and tactical awareness, but the physical demands of certain infantry operations had required adaptations that impacted unit effectiveness. The question was whether those adaptations represented minor tactical adjustments or fundamental limitations that compromised her suitability for infantry service. Morrison approached her as she finished her equipment maintenance, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. "Martinez, I want you to know that the concerns I've raised throughout training aren't personal judgments about your worth as a soldier," he said. "They're tactical assessments based on the realities of combat operations." Sarah looked up from her rifle, which she had been cleaning with methodical precision. "I understand, Sergeant. I know you're focused on mission effectiveness and soldier safety." Morrison nodded approvingly at her response. "The deployment we're facing will put every soldier to the test in ways that training can only approximate. Your technical skills and tactical thinking are genuinely valuable, but infantry operations will require you to perform physically demanding tasks under extreme stress." He paused, studying her equipment arrangement with professional interest. "The question you need to answer for yourself is whether you're prepared for the full range of challenges we're likely to face, or whether your talents might be better utilized in roles that maximize your strengths while minimizing exposure to your limitations." As Morrison walked away, Sarah continued cleaning her rifle while considering his words. The upcoming deployment would provide definitive answers to questions that had followed her throughout training, determining whether her determination to serve in infantry operations aligned with the tactical realities of combat situations where lives depended on every soldier's ability to perform effectively under pressure. 3 months into deployment, Sarah had settled into the rhythm of forward operating base life in a way that surprised both herself and Sergeant Morrison. The combat zone presented challenges that differed significantly from training scenarios, requiring adaptability and problem-solving skills that went beyond pure physical capability. Her role had evolved to focus on intelligence analysis, communication coordination, and precision marksmanship support, allowing her to contribute meaningfully while working within her physical limitations. The deployment zone was a mountainous region where insurgent activity required constant vigilance and sophisticated tactical responses. Operations involved a combination of patrol activities, intelligence gathering, and rapid response to emerging threats. The terrain was unforgiving, with extreme weather conditions and limited infrastructure that tested every aspect of military preparedness. Morrison had initially assigned Sarah to primarily base operations, keeping her involved in mission planning and communication support while limiting her exposure to the most physically demanding patrol activities. The arrangement allowed her to utilize her analytical skills and technical competence while avoiding situations where her limitations might compromise mission effectiveness or soldier safety. However, the realities of combat operations meant that every soldier occasionally faced situations beyond their anticipated roles. Personnel shortages, evolving tactical requirements, and the unpredictable nature of asymmetric warfare meant that flexible assignments and cross-training became essential for maintaining operational effectiveness. On a humid Thursday morning, Sarah was working in the communications center when an urgent message arrived from Patrol Alpha, a four-man reconnaissance unit that included Morrison among its members. The patrol had been conducting surveillance of suspected insurgent activity in a remote valley when they encountered an unexpected enemy force and became pinned down under heavy fire. The situation report was grim. Morrison had sustained a serious leg injury from improvised explosive device shrapnel and was unable to move without assistance. The patrol's radio operator had been killed in the initial contact, and their backup communication equipment had been damaged. They were effectively cut off from support, with enemy forces moving to surround their position. Lieutenant Collins immediately began organizing a rescue operation, but the tactical situation presented significant challenges. The patrol's location was in difficult terrain that would require careful approach to avoid additional casualties. More critically, medical evacuation would be impossible until the tactical situation was stabilized and enemy forces were neutralized or driven back. Sarah volunteered for the rescue mission, knowing that her marksmanship skills and familiarity with communication equipment could be valuable for the operation. Collins initially hesitated, remembering Morrison's concerns about her physical capabilities during demanding operations. However, the limited personnel available and the urgency of the situation meant that every capable soldier was needed. "Martinez, this won't be like training exercises," Collins warned her. "The approach route is extremely difficult, and will likely face sustained combat while attempting extraction. If you have any doubts about your capabilities, speak up now." Sarah considered the question seriously. The mission would undoubtedly push her physical limits, and any failure on her part could jeopardize the entire rescue operation. However, she also understood that Morrison and 3 other soldiers were trapped in a deteriorating situation where every minute of delay increased the risk of casualties. "I can handle it, Lieutenant," she replied with quiet confidence. "My shooting skills could be important for providing covering fire during extraction." The rescue team consisted of 8 soldiers, including Sarah, with assignments based on each individual's strengths and the tactical requirements of the mission. Sarah's role involved carrying additional ammunition and communication equipment while serving as designated marksman for long-range fire support. The load was substantial but manageable given the critical nature of the operation. The movement toward the trapped patrol required covering nearly 6 kilometers of mountainous terrain while maintaining tactical awareness and readiness for enemy contact. The pace was demanding but sustainable, allowing the rescue team to maintain both speed and the energy reserves needed for combat operations upon arrival. As they approached the area where Patrol Alpha was trapped, the sound of sporadic gunfire indicated that the tactical situation remained active. Enemy forces were maintaining pressure on the trapped patrol while positioning themselves to prevent rescue attempts. The rescue team would need to coordinate their approach carefully to avoid walking into an ambush while providing effective support to the trapped soldiers. Collins positioned the rescue team on high ground overlooking the valley where Morrison's patrol was located. From their position, Sarah could observe the tactical situation through her rifle scope, identifying enemy positions and assessing the challenges facing any rescue attempt. Her observations would be critical for planning the coordination of the rescue operation. "I count at least 12 enemy positions in a rough semicircle around our patrol," Sarah reported after careful observation. They're well positioned in rocks and vegetation, with good fields of fire covering the approaches to our soldiers' location. Collins studied the terrain through his binoculars, confirming Sarah's assessment and identifying additional tactical considerations. The rescue would require neutralizing enough enemy positions to create a safe corridor for extracting the wounded Morrison and the remaining patrol members. Martinez, your shooting position here gives you clear lines of sight to several key enemy locations, Collins decided. When we initiate contact, your job is to provide precision fire support to suppress those positions while the assault team moves down to extract our soldiers. The assignment played directly to Sarah's strengths. Her marksmanship skills and steady demeanor under pressure made her an ideal choice for the critical fire support role. The physical demands would be manageable from a relatively static position, allowing her to focus on precise shooting rather than movement under fire. As the rescue operation began, Sarah settled into her shooting position with practiced efficiency. Her rifle was equipped with an advanced scope that allowed precise target identification at extended range, and she had carefully calculated distance and environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory. The first phase of the operation required her to identify and engage specific enemy positions on Collins's command. Target, 2 o'clock, behind the large boulder, Collins directed through her earpiece. Engaging with automatic weapon fire at our patrol. Sarah acquired the target quickly, observing the muzzle flashes that revealed the enemy fighter's exact position. Her breathing settled into the controlled pattern she had practiced countless times, and her trigger squeeze was smooth and deliberate. The target stopped firing immediately, allowing friendly forces to advance toward better positions. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah engaged 8 different targets with methodical precision. Her shooting was accurate and effective, neutralizing enemy positions that threatened both the trapped patrol and the advancing rescue team. Her calm performance under intense pressure demonstrated exactly the type of contribution that her training had suggested she could make in the right circumstances. Meanwhile, the rescue team's assault element had reached Morrison's position and was providing immediate medical attention while preparing for extraction. Morrison was conscious but in significant pain from his leg injury, and moving him would require careful coordination to avoid further damage while maintaining tactical security. Martinez, we need continuous fire support during extraction, Collins radioed. Enemy reinforcements are moving toward our position from the north. Can you identify and engage those targets? Sarah adjusted her position to observe the northern approach, quickly identifying movement among the rocky terrain. The new targets were at longer range and partially concealed, requiring more precise shooting and careful target selection. Her training and natural marksmanship ability proved crucial as she engaged the advancing enemy forces with systematic precision. The extraction phase proved most challenging, requiring the rescue team to move Morrison across difficult terrain while maintaining defensive capabilities against continued enemy pressure. Sarah's fire support was essential during this phase, providing overwatch that allowed the team to bound between covered positions while carrying their wounded sergeant. As they prepared for the final movement away from the contact area, Sarah faced her most demanding test of the entire deployment. Collins needed her to displace from her current position and rejoin the main group while continuing to provide fire support during movement. The requirement meant carrying her equipment across rough terrain while maintaining the capability to engage targets quickly if the tactical situation demanded immediate response. Sarah gathered her equipment efficiently and began moving toward the rally point where the combined rescue and patrol teams were preparing to extract from the area. The weight of her rifle, ammunition, and communication equipment was substantial, but her conditioning and experience had improved significantly since the early days of training. During the movement, enemy forces attempted one final effort to intercept the extracting teams. Sarah found herself in a position where her marksmanship skills were again critical for mission success. Despite the physical stress of movement and the psychological pressure of ongoing combat, she was able to engage targets effectively while bounding between positions with the rest of the team. The successful extraction of Morrison's patrol, including the wounded sergeant himself, represented a significant tactical victory that demonstrated the importance of coordinated teamwork and individual skill contributions. During the movement back to base, Morrison was conscious enough to understand what had occurred and who had contributed to his successful rescue.
Morrison said during a brief halt while medics checked his condition. That was outstanding marksmanship back there.
Your fire support made the difference between successful extraction and potential disaster. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions at Morrison's praise. Throughout training, he had been her harshest critic, consistently questioning whether her physical limitations made her unsuitable for infantry service. Now, in actual combat conditions, her contributions had been not only valuable but essential for mission success and possibly for saving his life. Back at the forward operating base, the rescue operation became the subject of detailed analysis and lessons learned discussions. Collins's after-action report highlighted the importance of individual skill contributions and the way different soldiers' capabilities had combined to achieve mission success under difficult conditions. Morrison's injury required medical evacuation to a more advanced treatment facility, but before his departure, he requested a private conversation with Sarah. His leg was immobilized and painful, but his mind was clear and his assessment of the day's events was characteristically direct. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," Morrison began. "Throughout training, I focused so heavily on your physical limitations that I didn't give enough credit to the skills and capabilities you brought to the unit." Sarah listened quietly, understanding that this conversation represented a significant shift in Morrison's assessment of her value as a soldier. The rescue operation had provided concrete evidence of how her particular combination of abilities could contribute meaningfully to mission success. "I still believe physical capability is important for infantry service," Morrison continued. "But today showed me that combat effectiveness involves more than just meeting minimum physical standards. Your shooting, your tactical awareness, and your ability to perform under pressure made you one of the most valuable soldiers in that rescue operation." Morrison paused, his expression reflecting careful consideration of his words. "I've been thinking about this wrong. Instead of focusing on what you can't do, I should have been looking for ways to maximize what you can do exceptionally well." The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than any formal recognition or award. Morrison's opinion carried weight throughout the unit, and his public recognition of her contributions would significantly impact how other soldiers viewed her capabilities and value as a team member. Over the following weeks, as Morrison recovered from his injuries, Sarah's role within the unit evolved to better utilize her demonstrated strengths. Her assignments increasingly focused on precision marksmanship, intelligence analysis, and mission coordination rather than the physically demanding patrol operations that had been a source of concern during training. The new role alignment allowed Sarah to contribute consistently and meaningfully to unit operations while working within her physical capabilities. More importantly, it demonstrated that effective military service could take various forms, with different soldiers contributing different types of value based on their individual strengths and abilities. When Morrison returned to duty 6 weeks later, the dynamic between him and Sarah had fundamentally changed. He continued to maintain high standards and provide challenging assignments, but his approach now focused on maximizing her capabilities rather than highlighting her limitations. "Martinez," Morrison said during their first mission briefing after his return, "you've proven that determination and skill can overcome physical limitations when applied intelligently. You've earned your place in this unit." The words represented more than personal validation for Sarah. They reflected a broader understanding that military effectiveness required diverse capabilities and that soldiers could contribute meaningfully in various ways. Her journey from being labeled potential deadweight to becoming a valued team member demonstrated the importance of recognizing and developing individual strengths rather than focusing solely on standardized capabilities. As their deployment continued, Sarah's contributions remained consistent and valuable. Her rescue of Morrison had proved that courage and capability could manifest in many forms, and that the most important question wasn't whether a soldier could meet every physical standard, but whether they could contribute effectively to their unit's mission when circumstances demanded their particular combination of skills and determination. The deployment would eventually end, and both Sarah and Morrison would carry lessons from their experience that extended far beyond individual career considerations. They had learned that effective leadership meant recognizing and developing diverse capabilities, while effective service meant finding ways to contribute meaningfully within the constraints and opportunities presented by real-world situations. Morrison's recovery was complete, and Sarah's confidence in her military service had been definitively established. The sergeant who had once questioned her readiness for combat operations had become one of her strongest advocates, understanding that her rescue of his patrol represented not just individual courage, but the culmination of training, determination, and the right opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that transcended physical limitations.